Hi, I'm Marie. Mom and wife full-time, that's me. Paul, that's my husband, works a trading gig, and let's just say he's married to his job just as much as he is to me. Used to scribble down thoughts on books, reading between and beyond the lines, but these days I'm more about reading bedtime stories to our boy, Jack. Life threw some curveballs early on, lost my parents when I still needed them. That was rough. Then along came Paul, with a family in tow. His folks were the real deal, good people, you know. Took me in, no questions. Made me feel like I finally belonged somewhere again. Been with Paul for years now, since those college days when love seemed to be enough to fill any void. We settled into a rhythm, he at work and me taking care of everything else. But man, did that rhythm skip and stumble when Jack came into the picture. Paul changed, or maybe this was always him, just waiting for a reason to surface. He'd come home on a Friday night with a few too many drinks in him, loose-lipped and surly. "You gotta start shedding that weight, Marie," he'd snipe after slipping off his tie. "You barely fit in those jeans anymore." I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt, but I told myself to brush it off, toughen up, maybe he'd cool down by morning. But mornings just brought hangovers and silence until the next round. The house became this place where I tiptoed, trying not to set Paul off. Jack, little trooper, he could feel it too, sticking close, watching his old man with wide, careful eyes. One particularly rough Friday, Paul came home and made a beeline for the fridge, crack open a cold one. I was on the floor with Jack, blocks scattered around. "Another day in paradise, huh?" Paul sneered, leaning against the counter. I forced a smile. Just the usual, you know, chasing after this little tornado. I ruffled Jack's hair, but my heart wasn't in it. Paul tossed his head back, downing half the bottle. "Maybe put some of that energy into a workout routine, eh?" I bit my tongue, counting to 10 in my head. "I'll look into it," was all I managed, shuffling Jack into his pile of toys, anything to escape the cutting edge in Paul's tone. But the weight wasn't just on my hips, it was on my chest, heavy, making it hard to breathe. I didn't know who I was in Paul's eyes anymore. I had finally shaken off those last stubborn pounds. It felt good, kind of. But Paul, well, he had a talent for finding flaws. My sweats and baggy tees were the new target. "Jesus, Marie, you dress like you're living at the gym. When was the last time you dressed up? Remember how you used to look?" There he was, leaning on the doorframe with that look that said everything his words didn't. I glanced down at my stretched-out mom life tee and yoga pants. "This is just practical, Paul. You want me all dolled up to do laundry and wrangle our son?" One corner of his mouth curled up like he had just made a successful trade. "I dunno, how about looking good for your husband? That used to matter." I sighed, rolling my eyes. "Well, unless my husband starts taking meetings at the playground or the grocery store, I think I'll stick with practical." He shook his head, chuckling without humor. "You used to care, Marie." His voice trailed off as he wandered back toward the living room, his disapproval hanging in the air like a bad smell. Then there was Jack, our boy, trying to navigate the shaky terrain between us. I was teaching him please and thank you, thinking manners mattered. Paul caught a bit of our lesson one afternoon and scoffed. "Look at you, teaching him to be Mr. Manners. You want him to get trampled on?" "Manners are important, Paul. It's about respect," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Respect is earned, not politeness policed," he shot back. "He needs to toughen up, not be some yes, please pushover." Then the whole freeloader thing started. One night, Paul came home, tie askew, looking like he had won and lost the same fight. "Nice day?" he asked, sarcasm heavy as he glanced around what I'd come to see as our minefield of a home. I put down Jack's toy and braced for what was coming. Just the same, dealing with tantrums and spills. "How was work?" Paul's laugh was short and sharp. "Work? Oh, it was just dandy, supporting a parasite." My cheeks burned. "Excuse me?" My voice was a little too loud. Jack's eyes flitted from me to Paul, sensing the shift. A parasite, Marie. I work, you play house, he said, each word pointed and heavy. That's the thanks I get? I am raising our child, Paul. Your child. That's work. That's vital, I said, my voice rising now, too. Jack started fussing then, picking up on the tension. I swept him up into my arms, trying to shield him from the fallout. Paul had a knack for knowing when he'd pushed too far, and his next words were more measured. Marie, I go out there and deal with sharks all day. Come home, and what? I don't know, something different. I can't be your one-man show, Paul, I said softly, trying to defuse the bomb that our marriage had become. I'm here, juggling a million things for us, for Jack. We looked at each other then, really looked, and I wondered if he saw the plea in my eyes. The help me, back me up, be with me that I felt screaming inside. But he turned away, the finality of his silence telling me that no, he didn't see. He didn't want to. One day, the disrespect boiled over. Jack scrunched up his little face and called me a name, a real zinger. He got it from Paul. You're just a lazy bum, he had hurled at me, his tiny voice bitter and angry. I felt like I'd been slapped. What? Jack, no, you can't say that, I stumbled, shocked. He folded his arms, stubborn as his dad. Dad says it, so can I. That was the last straw. When Paul got home, I was waiting, steaming like a forgotten kettle. You know what your son called me today? I laid into him without waiting for an answer. Paul dropped his keys on the counter and chuckled, clearly not seeing the line had been crossed. What did he say? The truth? He tossed his words over his shoulder as he walked to the fridge, his casualness like acid on my skin. Is that funny to you? I was shouting now, my usual restraint snapped tight as a dry twig. Your son is calling me names. Paul leaned against the kitchen counter, beer in hand, a smirk blooming on his face. Oh, come on, Marie. Kid's gotta learn to stand his ground. I was staring at him, hands balled into fists. By disrespecting his mother? He shrugged, a lazy lift of his shoulders that sent me teetering on the edge. You're too soft on him. Look, he's getting some spine. Spine? My voice shot up another octave. He's learning to be just like you. Paul grinned and ruffled Jack's hair. Ain't that right, champ? I turned to Jack, who was looking at us with eyes that were too old for his face. Jack, listen to me. What you said to me this morning was wrong. You can't talk to people like that. Jack's chin jutted out, defiant and stubborn. But Dad. I don't care what Dad says, you listen to your mom. I cut him off, my heart thudding like a drum. I was desperate for him not to follow in Paul's footsteps. But Paul wasn't letting it go. The boy's gotta learn to speak up. World's not gonna hand him anything. You keep coddling him, he'll end up. I get it, all right? I get it. I cut him off, feeling the weight of his words like a physical thing on my chest. But there's a line. You don't get it, do you? Paul threw up his hands, that ugly smirk still there. Whatever, Marie. You make mountains out of molehills. I turned from him, that burning in my chest now a churning mess. This is not how I want our son to grow up. This disrespect ends now, it ends here. Paul just took a swig of his beer, and I knew, right then, my words were just bouncing off him. I looked at Jack, really looked at him. You apologize to me, now, I said, the power in my voice surprising even me. Jack's eyes darted between me and Paul, but he knew that tone. Sorry, Mom. The word was small, almost lost in the kitchen, but it was there and it was a start. I moved closer to Jack, knelt down so I was eye level with him. Thank you. We treat each other with respect in this house, you got it? Paul snorted behind me, but I ignored him. Jack nodded, a hint of my boy peeking through that new sullen shadow he wore. It was a crack in the wall Paul was building around him, a crack, but also a starting point. I stood up, squared my shoulders. We're going to fix this, Jack. No more name-calling, no more disrespect. We're better than that. I took Jack's hand, and we left the room, leaving Paul and his smugness behind us. I stood there on the sidewalk, my phone shaking in my hand. It was one of those moments where your gut ties up in knots. There, across the street, Paul was laughing it up with some woman. Blonde, curvy, and looking at my husband like he was the last piece of chocolate in the box. My thumb pressed record before I even decided to. The walk home felt a million miles long. A part of me hoped it was a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew. Back in our kitchen, I threw my keys on the counter. Paul was sitting there with a beer, like he always did, but today the sight of him made me sick. Without a word, I tossed my phone on the table in front of him, the video playing. Care to explain? Paul looked at the screen, his eyes going hard when he saw what was on it. He muted it, placed it calmly on the counter, and then looked straight at me. Yeah, she's beautiful, he said, his voice dripping venom. You used to be like that. I felt the slap of his words, my cheeks flaming with anger, my body tense. So, that's it, huh? You parade around town with some woman while I'm at home? Paul stood up, his chair scraping back against the tile. He was too close now, his voice low and mean. What, you stalking me now, Marie? Can't handle the fact that maybe there's more out there than what's inside these walls? I was reeling, feeling the pieces click together. Cut the crap, Paul. You're cheating. He didn't even flinch. You want to know why, he said, his chest puffing up. Because around her, I'm somebody. Not just the guy who pays the bills or the bad guy 'cause he ain't Mr. Rogers. So that's it? I edged back, feeling the counter dig into my hips. Your family's not enough for you? Paul snorted and grabbed his beer again. It stopped being enough a long time ago. Maybe if you'd have kept up with yourself, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere. The bile rattled in my throat. I'm not the one who promised till death do us part. His laugh was short and punched the air. Those are just words, Marie. They stopped meaning anything to you a long time ago. I should have been crying, but the tears wouldn't come. I was just empty and angry. I gave you everything, Paul. I gave you a son, I made a home for us. And this is how you repay me? He took a long drink, then leaned back against the counter. You gave me a home? Looks like a prison to me. Same old, every damn day. You think that's a life? We made vows, Paul. I shouted, my voice cracking. Yeah, and you broke them every day with your sweatpants and constant nagging. His face twisted into something ugly, something monstrous. That was the last thing he said before I walked out, my heart numb, anger seeping into every corner of my being. I was on edge the whole ride over to Paul's folks' place. It was gonna be nasty, but I had to lay it out for them. They needed to know who their son really was. His mom answered the door, with a happy smile. Marie, what brings you here at this hour? I just barreled past her. I gotta show you both something. Once his dad came in, I played them the video straight up. His mom gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth. His dad, red-faced and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, he barked at me, Paul's gotta stop this nonsense now. And like that, all hell broke loose. That night back at our place, Paul kicked off as soon as I walked in. You had to drag my parents into this, didn't ya? His voice was loaded, ready to fire. Yeah, well someone's got to. I shot back, my nerves steel. He was a storm brewing. With a step towards me, his hand raised, but he didn't get far. You're bad. Jack's voice cut through, strong and braver than any of us. Paul stopped stone cold. Paul's hand dropped, and his mask slipped a second, shock in his eyes. But then he hardened up again, cold as steel. I want you out, he said, spitting the words like they were sour. Take the kid and go. So we went. With Jack's hand in mine, I didn't look back. Bags thrown in the back of the car, we headed for the city, miles of road unwinding like my thoughts. The luxury house was something else, my unexpected inheritance. 2 stories, white columns, and a porch you could throw a party on, all waiting in another city, away from everything that had gone wrong. None of my folks, not even a whisker of Paul or his clan, had ever set eyes on it. When we pulled up to this grand house, Jack's face pressed to the window, eyes as wide as the moon. "Is this a castle?" His voice was a whisper, almost lost in the vastness of it all. "Something like that," I said, a laugh escaping me for the first time in. I couldn't even remember. We stepped into that house, our new beginning. It was silent, save for the echo of our footsteps on the marble floors, bouncing off the high ceilings crowned with crystal chandeliers. The furniture was swanky, left behind by folks I wish had lasted a lifetime longer. I plopped down on a couch soft as clouds, and finally, Jack's laughter filled the rooms. The sound of it was more luxurious than anything else in this place. We explored room after room, Jack running ahead like he was leading a parade. Each new door opened to a room grander than the last. "I call the biggest one," he declared, claiming a bedroom that overlooked a garden already blooming with the promise of spring. Laying him down to bed that night, the day finally caught up with me. My eyes burned with the tiredness of it all, but looking around at the high ceilings, the gold trimming catching moonlight, I knew we were worlds away from where we started. Sitting there, in the quiet of a room too nice for today's shadows, I whispered into the darkness, "We made it, kiddo." Life in the big house slowly shed the shadows of the past. Jack's giggles filled the halls more than the echoes of old fears. Most days, it felt like we had always been there, just the 2 of us, in our new safe haven. The house, with its silent strength, was keeping the world at bay, until the day Paul showed up, uninvited and unwelcome. He was at the door in a storm of anger. I opened it and there he was, looking like trouble had followed him around. "You can't just disappear with my son, Marie." I leaned against the door frame, unfazed. "He's my son too. And I didn't disappear. I moved on." Paul's scowl deepened. He glanced around, taking in the opulence of the place with wide, disbelieving eyes. "How can you afford this? I know you don't make this kind of dough." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. "Well, turns out I had a little left over each month. Who knew?" He raised an eyebrow, a sly accusation in his gaze. "And I'm struggling to cover rent for that old place by myself. It's damn near impossible now that they jacked up the price." I shook my head. He always was good at playing the martyr. "That's not my problem anymore, Paul. I've been using my own savings to cover the gap in the rent for years. Savings that, thank God, I don't need to bleed dry for that house anymore." The greed in his eyes flared up like wildfire. "What, and you're living here in luxury while I—" "Stop right there," I cut in. "This isn't your concern. This," I motioned to the grand house behind me, "is mine. Mine and Jack's." Paul took a step forward, but I didn't back down. "Look, I came here to fix things. I'm saying I forgive you for all this, sneaking around." His audacity almost knocked the wind out of me, but I had a little surprise that would put the brakes on his charade. From behind the door, I pulled out the divorce papers and slapped them into his chest. "And here's what I'm saying. We're done." He looked as if I'd slapped him with a physical hand, his face twisting through confusion, rage, and then settling on calculating desperation. "You can't do this. What about Jack?" I stood taller, my resolve like iron. "I'm doing it for Jack. He doesn't need this chaos you bring. Sign the papers, Paul. It's over." He glanced from the papers to me, then back again, his posture deflating slightly. "You'll regret this. You can't make it alone." "That's where you're wrong." I smiled, not from humor but from a deep-seated confidence. "I'm already making it. And without you, we're doing more than just fine. We're thriving." With a shake of his head, Paul looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. Instead, he turned on his heel and strode away, clutching the papers like they were a snake that could bite. Once he was gone, the house seemed to exhale with me. I closed the door gently, turning back to the life I had fought so hard for. Life had a way of tossing stuff at you, hard and fast. It was Thursday, the kind of day that should have been easy, but it wasn't. We shirked dinner for a bit, setting up ramps out of old books and watching the Lego car stupidly do flips and land upside down. Jack's laugh was infectious, the sort that wiped clean the worry lines off my face. His enthusiasm was a reminder that amid all the crap, there was still good, simple, unadulterated good. Then it came, a banging on the door that made my stomach drop and my face lose all its motherly warmth. Paul had a knack for bad timing and worse entrances. I pulled the door open and there he was, looking like he'd just come from a bar fight or lost a bet. "Paul, what's up?" He scowled, that usual look he gets when he thinks the world owes him. "So, this the high life? You playing house with my Jack while I'm scraping pennies just to get by?" Jack peeked from behind me, a knight in Lego armor. "Hey, screw off, Paul. Don't talk to my mom like that." Paul's face turned a nice shade of tomato. "The hell? You let him talk like that?" I stood there, hands on hips. "He's expressing himself. Something I should have done with you a long time ago." Jack came out from behind me, all fierce. "Yeah, get lost. My mom, my rules." Paul's anger was something else, a storm that had nowhere to go. "You think you're smart, huh? Talking to your old man like that?" Jack squared his shoulders, a small David to Paul's Goliath. "Don't gotta think. I know it. Mom knows it." Paul opened his mouth, but nothing came out. There was Jack, staring him down, waiting. This was no place for Paul anymore, no place for his bluster and noise. After a tense moment, Paul shook his head, muttered something under his breath and stormed off the porch. Jack turned to me with this look, the kind of look that said, "We got this." I nodded, all the agreement he needed. We went back to boiling pasta and racing Lego cars. That's how we do it, simple, nothing fancy. We just keep on. I was gabbing on the phone with Miss Dottie, Paul's mom, who was more my family than is now. "Honey, you just holler if there's anything you need, 'kay?" Her voice was always a warm blanket over the line. "We're all good, Miss Dottie. Really, couldn't be better," I assured her, twisting the cord around my finger. She hummed a pleased note. "Just makes my heart full to hear that. Keep on keeping on, you hear?" Frank, her husband, yelled from somewhere behind her. "Tell her that any time she wants to send over some of that lemon meringue, we won't complain." A genuine laugh burst out of me. "Expect a pie on your doorstep soon, Frank." Exchanging a few more pleasantries, we hung up. I shook my head. If someone had told me last year I'd be mining gold from the wreckage of my married life, I would have laughed in their face. Jack pulled on my sleeve, waving his drawing like a five-star general. "Look, Mom. This is our house." I looked down. His scribbles had heart. A big square house and two stick figures, a little one and a tall one, with sloppy grins and a lopsided sun shining down. The swing I'd put up for him stood out in green and brown strokes. "That's us, right?" A dumb question, really, but it made him nod with pride. "And I'm gonna sell my art, make us rich." There was serious conviction behind his toothy smile. "If you do, you're buying me that fancy coffee I've been eyeing?" I nudged him with a wink. He nodded, his expression all business. "Only the best for my mom." And just like that, the knot in my chest loosened a bit more. Sundays were like that, full of little miracles. The thing was, life had done a real number on us, but it was looking up. Paul got slammed by the door he let hit him on his way out. The fancy house he rented to impress his mistress? Turned out to be a couple of sizes too big for his wallet. Now he was cooped up in a tiny apartment, the kind of place his pride wouldn't have let him consider a year ago. And the mistress? She hightailed it the minute his pockets turned up empty and his promises hollow. But that was a tale for some other time. Right now is about Jack and me, and the park we were marching to, hand in hand. We stepped out, and the door clicked shut, a soft full stop to one chapter before immediately kicking off the next. Jack tugged me towards the park, his excitement bubbling over. I didn't glance back at our home, no need. Ahead was everything that mattered, me and my boy, parts of a world that kept on spinning, even when you felt like you'd fallen off.
How dare you show your face here? I hissed, as soon as I caught sight of Alex sauntering towards me across the school parking lot. My hands clenched by my sides, nails digging into my palms. Alex slid his sunglasses down his nose, his mouth curling into a satisfied smirk. Well, if it isn't my darling ex-wife Meredith, you're looking tired. His gaze raked down my body. I refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. What do you want, Alex? Can't I walk my daughter into school? He mocked offense. Our daughter Lila peered at Alex from behind me, unimpressed. She was wise beyond her 7 years when it came to her father. You didn't even call her on her birthday last week, I said sharply. So let's drop the devoted dad act. Alex's smirk faded. Before he could retort, a sleek black SUV pulled up beside us. The driver's door swung open and Ethan stepped out, tall and impeccably dressed. I felt a rush of relief at the sight of my husband. Everything okay here? Ethan asked mildly as he moved to stand beside me. Lila immediately went to him for a hug. Alex's lip curled derisively. Oh look, your white knight has arrived with his fancy new car. Too bad money can't buy taste or erase your seedy past. Ethan tensed, but a warning glance from me made him hold his tongue. I refused to indulge Alex's juvenile jabs about Ethan's privileged background. Not that it was any business of his. You should leave, I said coldly. Instead, Alex gestured at Ethan's SUV with its Delmont Foods logo. I see you clawed your way to the top after all. Then again, sleeping with the boss has always been your specialty, hasn't it, Meredith? Red-hot anger flooded me. How dare Alex throw cheap accusations at me when he was the one who had destroyed our marriage? But before I could spit out a furious retort, Ethan gently squeezed my shoulder. Actually, I'm not an employee. Ethan's voice was calm and steady. I was just named CEO last month when my father retired. So technically, this is now my company. Utter shock flashed across Alex's face. It gave me a rush of vicious satisfaction to realize he'd never known Ethan came from one of the wealthiest families in the state, inheriting a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Alex had only ever seen him as another junior executive at Delmont. Alex's mouth opened and closed, uncharacteristically lost for words. Ethan gave a thin smile. Yes, my trust fund alone could buy and sell you a dozen times over. Not that I make a habit of flaunting my family money. He flicked a piece of lint off his impeccably tailored suit. I just wanted to make one thing very clear, Alex. You are not welcome here. This school, this town, it's my territory now. Stay away from my family, or you'll regret it. Alex paled, shrinked back. Without another word, he turned and hurried away across the parking lot. I let out a long breath as we watched his retreating figure. Well then, Ethan slipped an arm around me. I'd say that's enough drama for one morning. Despite everything, I found myself smiling. No matter what storms we weathered, as long as I had Ethan by my side, I knew I could survive anything Alex tried to throw our way. When Ethan said he wanted to grab coffee after dropping Lila off at school, I readied myself for the talk I knew was coming. Ethan took a long sip of his latte, then set it down and turned to face me. So, you and Alex, and me too for that matter, all worked at Delmont Foods when you met, and the rest is history. The very short version of history, I said softly. Well, let me tell you a quick story on my end. Ethan leaned back, holding my gaze with his steady, pale eyes. You started as an assistant about 6 months before I rolled up from California, another recent MBA grad hotshot, hungry for my first real corporate job. One day the CEO himself takes me out on the Delmont yacht as a perk. And there you were in this tiny bikini. I felt myself flush at the memory. My God, how young and foolish I'd been. Barely 26, vainly trying to land a higher-up boyfriend and climbing up the food giant that was Delmont. Honestly, Meredith, I liked you immediately. You were smart, scrappy, vivacious. Ethan shrugged, almost shyly. But I could also tell you were unavailable. A few discreet questions revealed you were dating hotshot young marketing exec Alex Karev. I winced inwardly at Alex's name. How naive I'd been back then, too, imaging us the perfect corporate power couple. If only I could travel back and warn my past self not to ignore all the red flags. Anyway, I tried to move on and focus on my own career, Ethan went on. But, funny enough, here we are 10 years later, exes with Alex and married instead to each other. Ethan raised an eyebrow, softening his words with a wry smile. I chuckled despite the maelstrom of emotions stirred up by this stroll down memory lane. Here we are indeed. Who could have predicted this is where life would take us? I reached across to squeeze his arm. Lucky me, though. Ethan covered my hand gently. I like to think we both got lucky in round 2, Mir. His voice turned somber. But now I think it's time you told me what really went down between you and Alex. I sighed, old hurts rising up from long-buried depths. Honestly, Ethan, I don't know if I have the full story even now. He changed, slowly at first, stayed out more for drinks with the guys, networked aggressively like his life depended on it. I was scrambling to build my own career too, though, so maybe I just didn't want to see the signs. I shook my head at my own willful blindness. Back then, I just wanted the success, the status, the money. I was willing to ignore too much in exchange for that glittering dream. In hindsight, he was clearly cheating on me for months before I caught him with his assistant. I swallowed hard. It was the biggest cliché punch in the gut, and I wasn't even that shocked, just numb at my own stupidity. Oh, Meredith. Ethan's voice was gentle. Don't blame yourself. Alex made those choices. I wanted to make it work at first. I stared into my coffee, remembering those wretched attempts to salvage things as Alex grew ever more brazen with his affair. But when I got pregnant unexpectedly with Lila, it pushed me over the edge. I filed for divorce when I was 8 months along. Ethan blew out a long breath, shaking his head. Well, now Alex popping up again makes more sense. Unfinished business simmering under the surface. I nodded wearily. In my heart, I knew this was only the beginning. Alex's ego would drive him to keep needling old wounds, trying to tear down the happier life I'd built without him. Well, I was more than ready for the fight now. Alex had no idea what he was provoking. My hands shook as I quietly closed Lila's bedroom door, her sobs still echoing in my ears. At 6 years old, she'd just learned the hard truth. Her father didn't want her anymore. I still wasn't sure what had prompted Alex to suddenly file for full custody. Lila had come home from his weekend visit utterly distraught, clutching the court notice. She'd always been an afterthought for Alex at best, so why this sudden strategic move against me now? I stepped out the front door for air, nausea and anger battling inside me. As if conjured by my despair, a sleek sports car purred up the street right then, gliding to a stop at the curb just beyond my driveway. Jenna. Of course, Alex's blonde assistant turned mistress had come to gloat. I strode up to her lowered window, fury overriding my disgust. Well, hello there, Meredith. Jenna purred, snapping her gum. Long time no see. Her smug gaze traveled over my worn yoga pants and faded hoodie. Rough day? Cut the crap. I crossed my arms, refusing to let her see me ruffled. I'm guessing you're behind this latest stunt from Alex. Does his wife know you're running around town doing his dirty work? Jenna scowled, dropping her faux-friendly act. Good. Maybe if you weren't such a shitty mom, Alex wouldn't have to step in for the sake of your daughter, she snapped spitefully. Red hazed my vision. Without thinking, I reached in and snatched the sunglasses off her surgically perfected nose. Listen very closely, you plastic little homewrecker. My voice lashed like a whip as I leaned down to get in her face. You both may have money and connections, but I have everything to lose, and that makes me dangerous. I crushed her $100 shades in my fist. Now get the hell out of my neighborhood before you regret it. Jenna shrank away, for once stunned silent. I stepped back and let her peel off in a squeal of tires. As her taillights disappeared from sight, the red rage seeped away, leaving me drained and hollow. I trudged back inside with leaden limbs, pausing as my eyes landed on the pile of legal documents awaiting my response. Even just glancing at the logo for Alex's law firm kicked my heart rate up again. This was bad. Alex had the fancy lawyers and privilege on his side. While I could barely scrape rent together some months, he clearly aimed to bury me in legal bills, grinding me down through attrition. Exhausted and beaten down by the day's events, I collapsed onto the couch and finally let the tears fall. Hugging a throw pillow to my chest, I let myself cry in heaving sobs. For Lila's innocence shattered too young, for the years and dreams I'd wasted on Alex, for the injustice of seeing bad people continuously rewarded while the good suffered undeserved misery. A quiet knock at the door startled me. Scrubbing hastily at my face, I peeked out to see Ethan on my doorstep, his expression full of concern. Lila's teacher mentioned there was drama with Alex today and you left upset. I just wanted to come check on you both. He shuffled his feet. I know I'm probably overstepping, but I had to make sure you were okay. A fresh sob rose in my throat at this kindness. I stepped back in a wordless invitation. Ethan hovered uncertainly just inside. I'm so sorry you're dealing with this crap from Alex now on top of everything else. His jaw tightened, a hard glint entering those soft blue eyes. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but sometimes karma takes too damn long with assholes like him. Despite everything, his vehemence surprised a watery chuckle from me. I sank back down onto the couch, suddenly beyond grateful not to be alone in this battle anymore. Thank you for coming by, Ethan. I really needed a friendly face tonight. I wiped my eyes, feeling the tiniest spark of hope flickering back to life inside me. And as for Alex, trust me, his karma is coming, one way or another. I tapped my foot impatiently against the courthouse floor, my nerves stretched thin. Any minute now, I expected to hear the click of Alex's designer shoes stalking up the hall, flanked by his army of suits. But the footsteps that approached were slower, more measured. I looked up and, to my astonishment, saw Ethan striding towards me, looking crisp and confident in a charcoal suit that had to cost more than my car. Ethan, what are you doing here? I stared at him, confused. Ever since becoming an unexpected shoulder for me to lean on these past few turbulent months, Ethan had been nothing short of a godsend. But I couldn't imagine why he'd turned up here today of all days. Wordlessly, Ethan held open the conference room door, gesturing for me to enter first. Bewildered, I stepped inside. My knees nearly buckled with relief at the sight of Lila laughing happily away on Izzy's lap. Alex's attorney sister had a soft spot for my daughter even amidst this legal crossfire. I rushed over, unable to resist sweeping Lila into a fierce hug. Over her shoulder I shot Ethan a questioning look. He gave me a slow smile. I'm your new pro bono legal counsel. Surprise. What? How? I sank weakly down into a chair, dizzy with shock. Ethan sat beside me. I called in a favor from an old friend from my Harvard law days who owed me big time. Once I explained the situation with Alex trying to drown you in legal fees as retaliation, he was happy to help. Well, Iz and I decided to throw dear Alex a curveball this morning. Izzy smirked from across the table. Nothing screws up a bully's game plan like being utterly ignored. I glanced between them, almost giddy with relief. Having Izzy on my side had been a key advantage so far, but with Ethan's high-profile connections on board too, I felt unstoppable. Now, Ethan pulled out an intimidatingly thick folder of documents and turned to me with a smile. Let's talk about preempting every devious maneuver your ex may try. Don't worry about the legal bills anymore, Mir. I want to help protect you and Lila any way I can. His hand covered mine, warm and steadying. My heart gave an odd flutter. I tried to ignore the tiny inner voice pointing out all Ethan's attractive qualities, now amplified tenfold in a suit. There would be time later to analyze whatever was simmering between us lately. For now, I needed to focus on the fight ahead. All right, ladies, let's crush this. Izzy cracked her knuckles dramatically and winked at Lila. Auntie Izzy and Godfather Ethan have a bulletproof battle plan ready for the judge, so your mean old dad doesn't stand a chance. Lila's grin filled me with fierce determination. I would move heaven and earth before I let Alex torment my daughter for his petty games. Not when we finally had a real shot at a stable, happy future now, thanks to Ethan. I knew with bone-deep certainty that I could weather any coming storms with this man by my side. My premonition proved true over the whirlwind legal proceedings that followed. Just as Izzy predicted, Alex failed to make even a ripple fighting against the strategic duo of her and Ethan combined. At last came the bittersweet final signing of divorce papers I'd evaded completing for so long. My hand trembled slightly as I scrawled my name one last time as Meredith Karev. Ethan's steadying grip on my shoulder kept me grounded. As we left the imposing courthouse doors for good, I tipped my face up to the brilliant sunlight with relief. The future lay ahead, filled with promise. I could focus on Lila now, on my career, on exploring this surprising new connection with Ethan. The past could finally rest in peace. I turned to Ethan with joyful tears sparkling in my eyes. "It's over. We're free." His answering smile outshone even the dazzling sunshine above. "No, Meredith." He squeezed my hand, his own rare public display revealing the depth of emotion behind that reserved facade. "This is only the beginning." As I hurried down the echoing corridor towards the principal's office, my heart pounded out a frantic beat. The urgent summons from Lila's school ignited all my worst fears. Had Alex overstepped his bounds and caused more trouble? I burst into the room, my stomach knotted into a tangled mess. But the sight behind the imposing oak desk left me speechless. Alex huddled on one chair, suit disheveled and sporting the beginnings of a black eye. Beside him sat Jenna, vainly trying to cover what looked suspiciously like a bite mark marring her exposed shoulder, and standing guard over them both with crossed arms and icy fury blazing in his blue eyes stood Ethan. "Good, you're finally here." Ethan's tone was clipped, a sure sign his anger still simmered below that polished executive surface. "Perhaps you can shed some light on exactly what happened at the playground today, because your ex-husband and his accomplice seem a little dazed on the details." It was only then I noticed Lila tucked against Ethan's side, looking tiny and stressed but physically unharmed. Overwhelming relief at seeing my baby girl uninjured temporarily muted my barrage of questions. I went straight to her and swept her into my arms. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I pulled back to search her face worriedly. I rushed right over as soon as they called me. Lila's lower lip wobbled. "Aunt Jenna and Daddy came when me and Zoe were playing. They started yelling that Zoe's mom was a stupid lying lawyer," she sniffled. "Zoe cried and ran away. I got mad and bit Aunt Jenna." Her voice rose defiantly on the last line. I blinked, impressed despite myself at my daughter's bold defense of her friend. "Yes, and that was very wrong." Ethan smoothed down Lila's hair gently. "We don't settle fights with our teeth, even when protecting people we care about." He shot a reproving look at Jenna, who flushed and looked away. I stood, hands anchored on my hips. "Would someone please explain what the hell is going on here?" I demanded. Behind me, Alex made a disgruntled noise, but wisely stayed silent. Ethan guided me a few steps away and spoke lowly. Apparently Zoe's mother represented Jenna's ex in a nasty divorce, like ripping him off for millions level nasty. His mouth flattened grimly. "I assume they came here today meaning to cause trouble for her through the kids." Red-hot rage flooded my veins. The absolute nerve of Alex and his scheming girlfriend, dragging innocent children into their deranged grudges. I crossed quickly back to Lila, brushing her hair back to meet her eyes intently. "You were so brave defending your friend. I'm proud of you for standing up to bullies." Over her head, I pinned Alex and Jenna with a blistering look promising swift later retribution. Their twin glares bounced off my fury like droplets of rain. Just then the door banged open, admitting a harried woman I recognized as Zoe's mother. Her shocked gaze bounced between our tense tableau, and Lila tucked protectively under my arm. "Mrs. Quinn." Ethan swiftly intercepted her, laying on his polished CEO charm. "Let's step into the hall to discuss the incident from a legal perspective." He put a hand on her back, smoothly guiding her out. Through the window, I watched him work his magic, doubtlessly summarizing events in a light most favorable towards the girls. I focused back on my daughter, letting Ethan handle diffusing the situation his way. My priority stood cradled here in my arms. The rest could come later. "Let's get you home, baby girl." I lifted Lila's chin gently. "I think we've all had enough drama for one day." Her answering, watery smile and tight hug soothed my raging heart. As we left the tense office behind, I sent up a silent prayer of thanks for Ethan. Yet again he'd raced to our rescue like a dark knight in his sleek black car. And I'd never felt more secure knowing together we could conquer any monsters who dared threaten our peace. The tense silence stretched between us in the aftermath of my furious tirade. Ethan leaned back against the couch, jaw tight as he processed my barrage of bitter revelations. At last, the toxic flood tide of secrets from my past unleashed, I felt hollowed out physically and emotionally. Ethan dragged a hand over his face warily. "Jesus, Mir, I'm so sorry you and Lila have shouldered this toxicity alone for so long. That level of obsessive harassment. He shook his head, lines of anger bracketing his mouth. Why the hell haven't you involved the authorities before now? I closed my eyes against the rush of old shame. At first, I just kept hoping if I put my head down and focused on being a good mom, eventually Alex would lose interest when he didn't get a rise out of me. I exhaled shakily. But lately it feels like the floodgates opened. Like now that I'm actually happy again, he's snapped. Ethan reached over and squeezed my hand gently. This cycle of violence stops now, Meredith. No more handling this alone. I'm calling my private security team and a lawyer first thing tomorrow. Then I want to sit down with Lila and explain gently why she won't see her father unsupervised anymore. His eyes tightened with suppressed fury. Whatever it takes, I won't let that volatile bastard near either of you again. Overwhelmed with relief at finally setting down my exhaustive burden, I leaned into Ethan's strength literally and figuratively. Just feeling his solid chest under my cheek unleashed a fresh wave of tears, only this time, cathartic ones. I wept for the naive girl who once loved Alex unguardedly, for the battered woman who broke finally leaving him, for the protective mother hardened into vigilance against his campaign of cruelty. All different versions of myself rendered refugees by one man's destructive obsession. Ethan simply held me through the storm, hands gently rubbing my back. Having witnessed the traumatic genesis firsthand now, he no doubt understood this purge stood long overdue. At last I surfaced, scrubbing the heels of my hands roughly over my swollen eyes. I'm so sorry for dumping all this ugliness into your lap, Ethan, I rasped hoarsely. You deserve better than being saddled with another man's damage. His fingertips nudged my chin up insistently. You have nothing to apologize for. I care about you, both of you, deeply. I'm not going anywhere. His earnest words unlocked something painfully vulnerable in my chest. Before reason could intervene, I leaned forward and pressed my lips desperately to his. Our first kiss held no artifice or sweet romantic pretense, just raw, exposed need meeting steadfast reassurance. Perfect understanding passed soul-deep between us in the charged silence after we finally broke apart. Ethan grazed my cheek lightly with his thumb. We'll get through this fire, Meredith. Together. I covered his broad hand with my own, finally daring to hope again for the first time in years. With Ethan beside me, even Alex's sinister storm clouds seemed surmountable threats rather than looming doom. Bolstered by newfound courage, I hugged Lila close that night and made a silent, solemn vow over her sleeping form. No matter the costs, Alex would never torment my baby again. His twisted attacks ended now one way or another. Mama Bear had awoken at last to protect and shelter her cub, and not even his savagery could stand against my ferocity for long. All his earlier tempests now seemed paltry preludes to the full hurricane fury I would rain down if Alex dared menace my daughter further. For Lila's sake and mine both, the reckoning had arrived, and not even hell itself held an agony sufficient for unleashing on that miserable man, should he push me too far. I stirred my morning coffee absently, still mentally spinning over the latest unthinkable stunt from Alex. Luring Lila out of school illegally to take her for ice cream without my permission counted as kidnapping in my book, never mind his pathetic arguments about just wanting father-daughter bonding time. My phone buzzed with an incoming call, jolting me from vengeful fantasies of sixing Ethan's security squad on my deranged ex. Speak of the devil, I smiled instinctively just seeing Ethan's handsome face flash on my screen. Please tell me you have good news on the Alex front, I answered without preamble. Even better. Ethan's smooth voice held a smile. I come bearing gifts of gourmet cupcakes and moral support. Buzz me up? I glanced down at my faded college sweatshirt and messy topknot. Not exactly hostess chic, but then again Ethan had seen me far more haggard lately. You're a lifesaver, I sighed, pressing the door release. Moments later I ushered him inside, unable to resist going up on tiptoes to steal a quick kiss. Ever since that emotionally charged evening when our relationship shifted into romantic territory, I couldn't get enough of Ethan's steadying presence. He held up a box from my favorite bakery, looking unfairly gorgeous with his slightly rumpled hair and open collar exposing a tantalizing V of skin. Couldn't have you facing the lawyer on an empty stomach, he winked. I grinned despite my endless Alex-induced headaches. God bless this man. Over lavish red velvet cupcakes, Ethan outlined the injunction paperwork barring Alex from contacting either Lila or me outside official supervised visitation. And if he violates these court orders even once, he'll not only face contempt charges, but also trigger an automatic restraining order. Ethan looked immensely satisfied delivering this news. I could have cried in relief knowing the legal avenues now protected us while the bigger investigation into Alex's shady practices unfolded. Turns out even wealthy corporate executives had limits to flouting the rules under Ethan's watchful eye. Stuffed on cream cheese frosting and justice, I relaxed back with a contented sigh. Hopefully Alex finally realizes he's not exempt from facing consequences. Here's hoping. Ethan stacked our empty plates. Unfortunately, when it comes to ruthless narcissists like your ex-husband, the hard lesson usually requires hammering home a few times. His expression turned serious. I know you're not scared easily, Meredith, but please promise you'll let my security team handle any direct interactions if Alex approaches you or Lila again. My instinctive stubborn independence bristled slightly at the protective decree, but the earnest love shining in Ethan's eyes wore my reluctance down. I knew his directive came from caring deeply rather than any deliberately heavy-handed male posturing. I lifted our joined hands and brushed a soft kiss over Ethan's knuckles. I promise, babe. No more stubbornly trying to tackle everything solo. His shoulders relaxed, tension easing from his frame. Our sweet moment got interrupted by Lila bounding through the door fresh from school, full of chatter about her day. As we listened indulgently to her winding stories, I felt my heart settle into calm, steady rhythm for the first time in forever. The trials of my past with Alex seemed now muted nightmares compared to this luminous present with Ethan and Lila. I'd been running so hard towards imaginary futures before. I missed recognizing the only dreams worth chasing sat right here under this roof, filled with laughter and light. No matter what storms still brewed on the horizon, together we'd shine brightly enough to weather even Alex's bitterest gale forces. This right here already felt like home, the safe harbor I'd fought so desperately to reach through so many dark and frightening nights. At long last, we'd found our way home.